right, folks, we're going to see what's happening in the world. And of course, the Ukrainian war is still going on. And I'm sure that Sasha Starr will have some thoughts about that when he gets here. And of course, he's got his 11 o'clock show as well, Ukraine, Russia, and China. And who knows, maybe Ivan will be joining him from Kyiv talking about what is happening in that lane. So we'll definitely be seeing some things in that regard. And Russia has hit Ukraine grain for a fourth day and practices season ships in the Black Sea. So it is definitely amping up its attacks on the Ukrainian ports and all along those lines. And Zelensky has fired the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK after a sarcasm comment. So, yes, you got to be careful what you say and all in that space, because definitely that is going on in that world. And we'll see what's happening with other folks and what they've got to say as well. British Prime Minister Sunak has nearly avoided a wipeout in local polls. So that is saying something that folks are paying attention to in Britain, as Mr. Sunak has suffered two election losses as British voters rejected the ailing Conservative government. So it does look like Sunak will hold on to Uxbridge by election results, as folks are looking at how that impact will be in British politics and other politics as well. And definitely, we're still seeing fallout from the protest in India after a woman was strip jacked and paraded in Manipur. So that is something that folks are looking at and paying attention to as well. And Iraq has expelled the Sweden's ambassador over the Quran burning after protests at the Swedish embassy. So thousands of Muslims took to the streets to express outrage over that desecration incident and all in that space. So police are still searching, apparently, for that lioness that was on the loose around Berlin. And apparently there are other animals that are out loose as well, because apparently there's a boar that's out loose as well, because apparently that's where there are people. I keep confused at lioness. I'm sorry, I had to take a break, because they are saying that the police are concluding that the presumed lioness was actually a wild boar. I don't know that much about wild animals and all those big cats and things of that nature, but a lioness and a boar don't look all that closely related to me and everything if you look at their pictures. So how you're mistaking one for the other, maybe folks have got an idea and can explain that one to me. If they can, I would love to hear it and all in that space. But getting back to more serious news, Spain's Prime Minister Sanchez has the odds against him in that particular national election. So voter fraud is claims are rife on social media. So we have that issue of fraud, not just in the American politics, but in worldwide politics as well. And those are rife on social media ahead of the general elections. And the CIA's big admission on Putin's military might, and the U.S. spy chief is saying going to be tough for Kyiv to defeat Russia. So we're going to see if folks agree or disagree with that. And of course, people are still talking about the impact of the grain deal in terms and the pullout by Russians in that deal on the whole world economy, and particularly the state of food supply and all along those lines. So definitely, I'm sure folks will have things for that and notions about that. I know Nick always loves it when I talk about things that the other media is talking about it as well. But of course, one of the big news, it is hot. So definitely Europe apparently is bracing for yet another heat wave, as the Greek prime minister warns hard times are clearly not over. So that is something that folks are thinking about. And definitely there are even forced evacuations as Southern Europe battles wildfires during the intense heat wave. And France, Italy, and Germany's heat emergency is going on and all along those lines. So that is something that folks are thinking about and looking at and all in that space. There was a harrowing moment in Johannesburg, where apparently an explosion caused a buses to go airborne and almost crush folks in that particular city of the world. So that is something that is going on. And of course, there are still protests because of judicial reform over there in Israel. So people are paying attention to that story also. So definitely a lot of people are looking at that and trying to figure out what is going on in that space. I'm going to get to a couple of U.S. stories, and we'll get to the panel and see what they've got to say and what's going on in their world and what they are talking about also. Alabama, that's right, that state down there in the deep south, has executed a man for a 2001 beating death of a woman, where they are now resuming lethal injections and all in that space for those that are into the death penalty debate. That is the latest one in the country and all along those lines. So that is something that we may get into a discussion about or not, but we'll see how it plays out and what the various conversations are. And the Missouri Supreme Court has issued its decision in the abortion petition case. So it's allowing the abortion ballot initiative to move ahead. So that is something that is going on. So they have rejected the Attorney General's bid to upend the abortion vote. So it looks like Missouri will be looking at that as well. And kidnapped Texas girl was rescued in California after holding up "Help Me" signs inside of a car. So she used those "Help Me" signs in order to get rescued. So that was a very quick thinking on her part as well. And another article that I heard about or was interested in, and I definitely get to this conversation, was a comment by Nikki Haley that was recently released, where she was basically saying that all of the judicial lawsuits and the things that are going on in that space are not exactly helping the Republican primary season, and that she was hoping that that distraction could not be an issue, and that she also wants Trump to be on the debate stage, because apparently he is saying that he doesn't necessarily have to be on the Trump stage. And she was even using the parallel of RFK and Biden. And she was saying that there are a number of issues that she would like to talk about, everything from migration to definitely school class kind of issues and education issues, to a number of other issues that she felt were being distracted by some of the activities that were going on from the courts and others. So definitely that is something that folks are thinking about and are definitely reflecting on, and all in that space. So definitely maybe folks will have some thoughts about that, and definitely they might even have some thoughts about the calls to impeach Biden intensifying. And another Democrat has definitely gotten into the whole fray as well. So we'll see what that story is all about and what's going on in that way. In addition, and speaking of the heat wave, and this is one that I know Nick will also enjoy, and then I've got a question based on a conversation that I was having this morning and all along those lines. But the conversation the interesting thing that was happening that folks may find interesting was and over there in the West Coast, I think it was Las Vegas, there was actually the heat wave causing problems with an airplane. So I know that people were wondering about mass transit and the mass transit situation, and particularly that with airplanes, even around COVID and the end of COVID and all in that line. But now people are apparently not prepared, because apparently the planes are taxiing and people are having heat strokes while waiting for the planes and to land and or to take off, and a number of other things. So that was a story that I saw, and apparently there were some folks that were having some serious issues, and that was something that was reflected, because you would think that the various plane companies would be more prepared, but apparently where they were not prepared as we think they should be. So we're going to get to some of the other stories, and I'm bringing in Nick Palveda, my good friend and the boss of the network. I've also got Jacoby with me here as well, and also I've got Debbie Peterson here also. And we'll see if any of the other panelists come in and join us. Debbie, it's early in the morning for you, so glad that you were able to join. I can't remember. I think you said you two are still, I know California is home base, but I think that you were actually in Honolulu, and I don't know if you're still there, if you're back in California or all along those lines.
Well, I'm still in Hawaii, and yeah, it's 4 a.m, but it's worth getting up to have conversations with you all.
Well, I appreciate it. Love those conversations. This is actually for everybody, because I was actually in a room yesterday and everything, or actually earlier this morning, a room in the Clubhouse, and there was a young lady from Peru, and she actually brought up some interesting points, but I'd love to hear your perspectives. And I was hoping Shaquille would be here as well. But one of the things that she was saying in the room, because she's actually out where in your neck of the woods, she's now moved to California, and I can't remember where. I think she's actually in the Los Angeles area and all in that space. But she was talking about how when she grew up, she didn't even know that she was poor because not having shoes and not having running water was the norm in her community. So she didn't necessarily know that she was poor because that was the norm for other people. And I've heard other folks from other countries say that as well. But that wasn't so much the question. The real question that I was curious about was she felt, as I heard the question that she was posing to other people and everything, that we sometimes, and ironically, I personally think that it was kind of the thesis of CRT, which is what her argument was, which is that we really color our politics and color our conversations about history. Because the example she was using was that apparently Peru and even she said Germany really, I won't say they highlight their bad traits, but they show their history to their school kids and a number of others, warts and all. And she felt that we don't necessarily do that, that we kind of gloss over some of our injustices and things in that space. So Debbie, you're over there in California, you went into the city hall. Could you see that perspective from somebody in a foreign country? Because I know we do talk, and I've even said this on other shows, I know we talk about like the heroes, the Martin Luther Kings and the Malcolm X's, and then if you want to look at the more national figures of the founding of the country, yeah, we talk about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and a number of other things, but we don't spend a lot of time in the history books on a lot of the negative aspects of our history. And I think that was kind of her argument. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about that and if she has a legitimate claim.
I would agree with her. I think it is human nature not to want to talk about the things that we don't do well. And I think in some cases it's shame. In some cases it can be corruption we want to cover up. And I certainly see it in my own community. People don't want to face it either. And what I always say is if you don't face it, you can't fix it. And I think in cases of Germany, there is shame, there's embarrassment, but that has led the younger generations to be more honest about what happened with Hitler. And if you can be more honest about it, then you can address it, figure out what happened, and hopefully learn something from the history. So, and I think as Americans, we aren't quite so good at that as other countries.
Yeah. What's your take on that, Jacoby? Because like I said, I thought it was an interesting perspective that she brought to it. You are definitely the parent of two kids and everything, but I didn't know if you had any thoughts as well, because I thought it was a legitimate argument that she was bringing out when she was bringing that. And I'm hoping that I can get Johanny, because that is the young lady's name, to come in at some point. I want to say she's in her mid to late 40s and all in that space, but hopefully I can get her to come on and share some of her thoughts about growing up in that particular country and now living here in the United States. I want to say she said for about 22 years, so most of her adult life, because I think she's been in California now for a few, and before that I think she was in Texas.
I mean, I agree. I think one of the big things is that outside of the community, so like if I were to take the Black community, for example, one of the big things that we'll do is we'll try and look at our quote unquote heroes and talk positively, especially outside of the group or outside of the community about them. Because yes, I mean, shame is there. I mean, even MLK Jr. had, a dark side to him, but we don't want to talk about that because we're trying to create heroes and ideals for people to live up to. So I think what Debbie had talked about is spot on. Yeah. I mean, there's, it's all the intent of what it is, what is being glossed over. So is the intent to hide corruption? For some it is, because in some communities, in some areas, in some nations, that's what happens. And you can talk to an individual from Cuba, and that individual from Cuba will talk about how beautiful Cuba is, but doesn't want to talk about, the corruption within the government itself, because it brings shame upon them. So, yeah, I mean, it's understandable. It's what we all do. I think one thing that we do also is that within the communities, we try it, and I guess it's also due to a protectionism as well. I mean, there's just a myriad of things that cause us to only talk about the positives within, from the nation wise. But before I get off on that tangent, there was one show, Newsroom. Everybody's played that one clip from Newsroom where there was you had the reporter they had three people on a panel, and the panelist asked the news reporter, hey, can you talk about what is great about America? And then you had a Republican and you had a Democrat, and then you had the reporter. They asked the Republican said, we're the greatest country, blah, 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 gave some fluff, basically the talking points that are normally out there. The Democrat said, gave some fluff, the talking points that are just out there. And the news reporter didn't want to say anything because he wanted to be the honest guy, because he was just fed up with the talking points. So they finally egged it out of him, or pushed it out of him. And he pointed out the fluff that the one Republican was talking about and saying, hey, you're talking glorified about the country. Well, every other country has freedom. All countries have freedom, or all these particular countries have freedom. So you saying this doesn't make sense. It's just fluff. And then said the Democrat doesn't speak up as much, but isn't really the reason people don't like them is because they're not fighting hard, and so on and so forth. But then went on to talk about America and actually gave the things that we led in terms of the prison population and so on and so forth. And we as Americans, when we go to another country, don't talk about how we do lead the world in a prison population. We aren't number one in mathematics or sciences and stuff. So we aren't leading the world in that. We are a service industry country now, more so than a production-oriented country. We don't create things anymore. So these are negatives that we see about ourselves that we're not going to talk about because it's a protectionism thing. But either way, I think within the community, even though we've, again, gotten away from it some, but within communities, I think you're able to talk a little bit more freely about the negatives because you're wanting to fix those negatives. But even still, it's pain, and you don't want to talk about pain.
And along those same lines, I love to hear Debbie's thoughts about this. A lot of times we don't talk about those things that are the scars even in our own country, because I think some people, and I think that the young lady alluded to it, was, one, she didn't know that she was poor until she got an understanding of that as an adult, because she was used to those things that we consider symbols of poverty, like not having running water and the struggle to get food and a number of other things. So she was used to that as her norm growing up and all in that space. So, and oftentimes when we go to other countries, and I think even Nick has alluded to this, we are sometimes surprised, not so much by the what we perceive that country to be, but what we don't perceive that country to be. Because many people, when they think of Colombia, they will think of the crime-ridden aspect of Colombia. And I'm not saying that Colombia doesn't have some crime, but even one of our other founders of the network has been to that country and was surprised by the cleanliness and the friendliness of the people. And she doesn't have a direct tie to that country. Now, another one of our hosts does have a direct tie and was arguing that same thing. So I think sometimes we are colored by our perceptions and don't necessarily think about the more positive aspects of some of those countries as well. But I just wanted your thoughts, Debbie, because you have been to various countries. I don't know how many you've been to. I talked to a gentleman yesterday that been to 84. I'm really impressed, and I'm thinking that he's going to try to make it to all 200 at some point or another, but he's been to 84 and definitely considers himself a traveler, and I think he's even in that luxury real estate market, so that might be part of the reason of his travels and all of that. But definitely, I'd love to hear your thoughts about perception and our misconceptions sometimes of other people.
I haven't been to 84 countries. I have missed Asia. I have been to New Zealand. I have been in several times, been to lived in Europe for 20 years, so traveled extensively there, been in the Middle East and Africa. And so I sometimes, and let's give the worst case first. I will agree that with your young friend's analysis that we we perceive things in the way that we're socialized in the place that we are. And so as Americans, we can be somewhat isolated. And so we don't realize that perhaps somebody else sometimes does do it better. And we do drink that Kool-Aid. Oh yes, we're the greatest nation in the world. And then when I went to Scotland for the first time, they were the ones who had the hole in the wall where you could get money out of the machine. They had them years before we had them, and all kinds of things, technology wise and just service wise, that we think we're the best, and sometimes other people have them a lot better, a lot earlier. And I'm so talking about the worst, if I'm going to be extremely critical, I sometimes view it as a kind of arrogance, because if we think we're the best and we never stop to look at how anybody else is, it's kind of a silly way to view it, because how can you be the best if you've never actually compared yourself with someone else? But the other thing is that it stops us from getting better. If you never look at how someone else does it, if you don't work with other people, you don't figure out how you can do it better. And that always disappoints me. I always wish that we could be less insular in that way. I think it would help us. And of course, travel does that for us. And but the other thing is, going back to history, there have been there's a theory out there, and I don't think that it has been studied at length. I haven't seen any empirical studies or anything else, but there is a lot of talk about cycles of virtue which continue over in countries and in people and in populations, and then cycles of corruption, and those also continue. Things tend to continue as they are. And in the Scandinavian countries, which are have rated themselves, the people there say that they're happier than the people in other countries say that they are, and they've rated themselves that way for almost 20 years now. The 5 happiest countries in the world always seem to be the Scandinavian countries. And in those countries, they seem to have cycles of virtue. They trust their government. They trust one another. They have great social cohesion. Their institutions are good institutions. And those are all the things that make people happy. And they do not have the same history that we have in some of the other Western countries. They don't have a history of slavery. They have more of a history of inclusion. They have high immigration, and they integrate those who immigrate rather than segregating those who immigrate. And so I think that there is something to be said for a positive history, a history where you haven't enslaved people, a history where people have been more or less equal for centuries. And that kind of a positive, constructive treatment of one another does seem to generate happier societies.
I can definitely agree with you on that and everything. I have to bring up something a little lighthearted just for a minute and everything, and I kind of alluded to it in the news, and then we'll get to Sasha's report, and I do know we have his show coming up as well, and some of the other issues that I mentioned earlier in this newscast and everything. But Jacoby and even Nick, how the heck do you mistake a lioness for a boar? I've looked at the two animals; they look nothing alike and everything. So I'm still trying to figure that one out and everything, because apparently that is what they are saying with that whole lioness on the loose, that it might have been an actual wild boar instead of a lioness. And I've looked at those two animals; they look alike.
My whole thing is, I guess alcohol was involved.
Had to have been for you to mistake those two animals. Like you said, they look nothing alike. Best I can tell. Maybe Nick can tell me how they are very similar, because they look nothing alike. One is got lots of fur and is much more regal, and I'm not saying that against the boar. The other one's got that horn-like image and everything, but yeah, they're and is much smaller.
Not saying anything against the boar. You're trying not to offend the boar now.
Don't want to offend the boars. The boars might be watching.
Well, even though we love to discuss these issues because the media wants us to discuss heat in the United States, it should be a 2-minute conversation. Then we should move on to some really important issues that exist in this country. And let's start with the student debt, 1.7 trillion. Okay, all of a sudden, nobody wants to address this particular issue, but it's a big scam. You want to know the biggest scam in the United States besides Bitcoin? It's student debt. 1.7 trillion. We shouldn't have anywhere close to that issue. Here's another big issue we have in the United States that we're just glossing over. The national debt, $31 trillion. Why isn't that? That should occupy a huge part of our nation every day. Every day we pay more and more interest on the national debt. It keeps piling up. And the thing is, we have no plan in sight by Washington, D.C. to cover this or even maintain it. Here's another problem that should be brought up. Healthcare costs. 20% of our GDP goes to healthcare costs. It is the biggest in the world, not even close. And the thing is, nobody's addressing this, and the media doesn't want to address it. If the media doesn't
Hold on a
address it,
second, Nick.
we're
Before
not
you go there,
Why aren't we
there is
addressing
a
this
issue within the Republican Party that I also found an interesting article on, and Jacoby may find this interesting because apparently one of those issues you mentioned, the student debt, is a issue that is a hot button issue for our young people, and apparently this is a real big deal because apparently those young people are coming out in voting. So a lot of those educational enclaves, as they sometimes like to be called, are definitely having growing populations, and this is actually where the Democrats are gaining their foothold in some spaces, and apparently the Republicans are scrambling for answers because they don't necessarily have a plan for that particular group and everything. So that issue may cause them some pushback from the young folks, and I think it already has. But hold on a second, Deb, are you seeing that in the West Coast? Because that was an article that I found out, and they were talking about Wisconsin and the bitter race that was going on there. There was a very contested Supreme Court race, and voters turned out in record numbers. And of course, it's been a long standout in terms of their progressive stronghold, like Milwaukee and Madison. And I went to school in Milwaukee, so I can say that not just from the article, but my own experience. But there are a lot of and states and cities like that where the college kids are going like, wait a minute, you don't want to give us a loan, then we got to find somebody that does want to give us a loan, or that is going to have a better plan than the plan that you have and everything. And that is where the Republicans are worried in some degree, because that is a major part of the voting population. And of course, they are now getting their feet wet, some of them, because it's their first time voting. And I'm not saying that all young people are either conservative or liberal, but they do oftentimes, like many of us, vote their pocketbook and vote for things that are important to them. So definitely this issue, as well as the abortion issue, because there was apparently a doctor that made a recent testimony in that space as well, are issues that they are concerned about. And there may be some pushback that the Republican Party, and I know we don't have any of the usual folks that represent and kind of talk about that party on the panel on this particular day. But Deb, what are your thoughts? Is this an issue they need to be worried about?
Yes, they are worried about student debt, of course. And what I see is that locally in the last presidential election, our county registrar of voters, our county clerk, said that it was a record for the ages. We had the highest voter turnout ever. And that was with when it was mail ballot, primarily, almost entirely, because it was COVID. And but what we're seeing is, yes, the more Democrats are registering, more people are registering as Democrats, but we are pretty much here, and because we have a high agricultural population, we're pretty much 30%, 30%, 30%, or, a third, Republican, Democrat. And then there's a huge third that's independent, that refuses to say which they are. And I think that's something else to be aware of, that the parties are losing large numbers of people because people simply can't thole the nonsense that they're seeing. And I do have to say that I really appreciate raising those important issues of the national debt, student debt, and healthcare at 20%. I have close friends in Britain who are doctors who, when they came over, were simply, they just found it incredulous that we would spend so much on insurance and then still on top of that pay for healthcare, pay out of pocket for healthcare. And the doctors themselves weren't suffering. They were earning as much as doctors here. And so I do think that we need to find solutions on all of those. And we need to get out of our heads on what the temperature is outside and start working on some more important issues.
Well, here's another issue that Jacoby brought up. We brought it David Walker's show. USA lost $800 billion in PPP loans. When Jacoby told me this, I just couldn't believe it. Okay. But the people who are listening should do some research on this one. This is a big, big scam. And all media, everybody's quiet about it because, frankly, we're on the take. And so what happened was this: the 800 billion went to the top quintile of American society that got PPP loans, which my company did. We got a substantial PPP loan. We haven't paid it back yet. My partner said we should pay it back. And I told my partner, I said, you know what? They're forgiving it. And we're sitting there dumbfounded because I said the research shows that they forgave 797 billion of the 800 billion in PPP loans. It was the ultimate wealth transfer to the wealthy, and it caused, of course, great inflation. The wealthy people in this country are being quiet about it. The corporations, the individuals, everybody.
Yeah, definitely being quiet. Hey,
Well, just a quick.
Major transfer of wealth to the top 1%. And Jacoby brought it up, and I was going, Jacoby, that can't be true because my loan's still outstanding. But then when I looked at the research, he's right. It was a major transfer. So I told my business partner, let's not pay it back. Let's talk to the government of forgiving it. And it's not a small
So
it's ridiculous what just
hold on a
happened.
second. Jacoby, what are you going to say? And then I got a question for
We'll
you.
talk about because they're on the take, baby. What just
So just one of the quick things. I mean, that's a transfer of wealth. Also, when the tax cuts happened, that was a transfer of wealth to the top percent as well. So these things that we're talking about, saying that the rich are mum about, or the rich are not even saying much for. Well, you notice how they didn't say anything about the money that got lost. The same way with this 800 billion, the money that got lost with these tax cuts that went to the wealthy. It's the same thing. It's that transfer of wealth. And when we're talking about all these debts that get built up, that's all part of it. I mean, all this transfer of money going from one block to the other.
Incredibly bad. It's incredibly bad. People don't even know how bad it is, and they're being stupid about it. Let me tell you how bad it is. If you're in the top 1%, you have 40% of all the assets in the United States. If you're in the bottom 40%, you have access to 1% of all the assets in the United States. We have a society in this country that's similar to France prior to the revolution in 1789. I mean, but we're quiet about it. It's like,
no, we're quiet about that. But I want to say, I did have a quick
We're
question
not
for you.
quiet about it. The problem is that the people that are loud about it get mocked, get told to be quiet. They don't get on TV as much. They don't have the lawyers to quiet others about it. So the people that are loud about it have been begging and pointing out there's a huge wage gap and it's only growing. There are all these problems and they're only growing. But because of the loud messaging machine, when we people yell out, well, the media is all left wing, and the media, it's not. The companies that own the people that own these media companies lean mostly right. The most local media is owned by right-wing organizations. So when we're talking about, oh, well, the media is left-wing, it's not. It's actually the messaging that they're putting out that gets stuck in people's heads. So, for example, Mark, to bring it back to what you were talking about our perception of other countries.
Right. That's what I was gonna say. Right.
One of the things, if you notice, people will think that Africa is nothing but filled with these huts and kids begging for money. Why? Sally Struthers and that video showing kids in huts and flies on their faces and everything else. Oh no, it's the worst place. No, they actually have a thriving society. Vietnam. South Korea, for example. People think that South Korea is such a horrible place. Well, do you realize that the gaming industry itself, the esports industry, blossomed because of South Korea? That's where it actually propagated out of, because they made their esports players into superstars. They paid all this money, and the actual esports blossomed right there and took off like crazy. Their internet is one of the fastest. They have a huge tech society. India, we bring people in from India all the time, and India has a huge tech population. If you're looking for codes, if you're looking for tons of stuff, where are you calling? You're calling India, because they have a lot of the programmers that are out there. But we in our minds think that India is this backwoods desert. We think Saudi Arabia, or I'm sorry, Iraq is this bombed out rubble place. No, they have a thriving society. Egypt, we have these mindsets because of what we have been messaged and what we see on TV. And that is what the Republican Party has done in terms of messaging around, well, the taxes, around the PPP loans, around, oh, well, we should hate college students for asking for money to be forgiven, even though, hey,
Jacoby, along but along those same lines, and that's actually where I was going to go as well. Sometimes there is this notion that if we can't win the argument or can't win the situation, we'll just ignore them. We know that here in North Carolina, I'm just using North Carolina as an example, a lot of our more liberal towns like Durham and like I would even argue to some degree Charlotte and definitely Greensboro are also university towns. So a lot of times people will just dismiss them because they feel that they will be controlled by the Democrats. As a matter of fact, we have a new mayoral candidate that just entered here that I would say is in that liberal mindset to some degree, even though he's a businessman, that being Leonardo Williams, getting ready to throw his name into the hat. But the Republicans will often just dismiss that, and they will concentrate on other parts that they feel that they can win, because they also have their strongholds also that might be urban cities that are more Republican leaning or whatever. So then they will try to go for that middle part. So I'm wondering if what's not happening, because this article I was reading in Politico was about the college conclaves. If all over the country, a lot of people are like, I don't care about Milwaukee. I'm just going to try to win the rest of Wisconsin. I don't care about Durham. I'm just going to try to win the rest of North Carolina, because I already know that I've lost those states because the college kids are not going to vote for me. I try to win a few votes here and there to kind of taper their victory, but I'm conceding that they are going to win that. So I'm wondering if that's not happening globally, where a lot of the Republicans are just, as the Republican strategists are like, I'm not even going to try to win that state, that city, because that city is not going to go to us. I think the same even in California with Los Angeles.
So I think Deb can probably speak on this more so being already in government and
Right.
Having run campaigns.
Right.
But my perception is that it's all about money. Right. If you can't afford to spend the money on a particular place, even though I'm a bigger advocate for education, I think if you know who you're voting for, you should go to these places. But sometimes it's just an expense that you can't spend. I mean, because like I said, if for example, I think going to a Korea example, the way that North Korea maintained, or that Kim Jong-un or that Kim Jong family maintains its dominance, is by keeping people ignorant of what's outside the world. Same thing in Cuba. When Cubans want to defect, they find out that, hey, there's a better place for me here because I can see the other information. China, they manipulate the internet so you can't do particular searches. Twitter was one of the biggest pushes with the Arab Spring or the Arab uprising, when in Syria and in Egypt, Russia, they have their own network with RT. If anytime you see RT.com, that's Russia Today, run by the Russian government. And they're pushing out propaganda based on what Putin and the government tells them to run. And what's sad is Fox runs with RT. But that's the way you do it. You control the information. But if you have the money to get there, then get there. If you can get there and educate people on your position and hopefully, get a couple of votes. That's all it takes. Just get a couple of votes and get that fire, or get the smoke going. Smoke brings fire. You got the fire. Hey, now you got more people understanding. Hey, I don't want to destroy America just because I believe in this. I'm trying to help improve your life. And so it's just a different way of communicating.
No, definitely. What's your thoughts on that, Debbie? Because I get the impression, like I said, you've been on the show now almost 6 or 7 times now, and I definitely hope that you'll continue coming on because we enjoy your commentary and all along those lines. But I think of you as being one of those politicians that will walk across the aisle and will negotiate across the aisle. But I don't know that there are enough politicians like you that are willing to talk to people that might have a different opinion or all along those lines, or even be from a different party. And I do think, like I said earlier, that sometimes people will dismiss an entire region because they feel that they have already lost that region. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
I'm not really up on larger campaigns, and I haven't seen that to be the case, but I can't speak accurately on it. What I will do is tell a little story. My son went to Cal Berkeley, and when I was at college age in the late 60s, my father told me he would disown me if I went to Cal Berkeley because it has a reputation for being so incredibly left-wing. And when my son went off to Cal, his father and I both sat him down and said, now, son, you know, your parents are both liberal, but we want you to understand that you ain't seen nothing yet until you get to Cal Berkeley. And I was a little bit worried about it because he was just 17 when he went off. And so I spoke with a close, I won't say a close friend, but someone I have great respect for. And it's a mutual respect because we both really care about the numbers and we care about things being honest and things being right. And I will tell you that my far left friends and my far right friends all agree on these things. And that's how we work across the aisle. And so he had, as a conservative, been the city manager for the city of Berkeley for some time. And so I cornered him one night at an event and I asked him, you know, is my son going to be okay up in Berkeley? I know you're very conservative. You were the city manager. We're a little bit worried about him. And he said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it at all. He'll be fine. And some of the best conservative thinkers come out of Cal Berkeley. And the point I'm making is that, yeah, we do work across the aisle. We can work across the aisle, and across the board, across the aisle, all of us agree that we want things to be cost effective. We don't want money wasted. We don't want to be ripped off. And I think we probably all agree with those 1% numbers that doesn't work.
Right. No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. The other thing that I had alluded to earlier, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about this, is sometimes in their rush to get people on the debate stage, people will paint other countries as the ultimate enemy and all in that space. And I heard that to some degree in the quote that I read from Nikki Haley, because she was basically saying that we're at a de facto war with China, whether we want to say that we are or aren't, and that North Korea has developed a atomic bomb that they can use. And she was pointing out some other things that are part of the global community that are threats. And some of these are from the communist nations and some of those other socialist nations. So I was just wondering, is that a true picture, and is that something that our national politicians need to be concerned about, or is that kind of that otherism that we've talked about on the show before, where people are trying to find the demon in the room or the thing that they can blame and all along that space? Because I was also reading an article where apparently Kamala Harris met with some of the Muslim community, and they were reflecting on the hate crimes that rose after not just 9/11, but recently because of some of the Trump rhetoric and some of the other rhetoric that has been directed toward them. So apparently she, meaning Kamala, attended a meeting during one of their major Muslim holidays. And definitely there are more Muslims in office than there have been historically for a number of years, and all in that space, and even some in the administration. And some people may be concerned that they have dual allegiance. I do not believe that, but there might be some of those on the right that have that thought pattern. But what are your thoughts about that notions and some of the things that are going on in terms of going against these other countries that are not ours and trying to make them the enemy, whether they are or aren't? Anybody?
I can tell you for sure that what we hear about Russia and what we hear about China are true from friends. I have a friend who's a Chinese immigrant and a friend who's a Ukrainian immigrant, and they both, after years of knowing them, when I've told them stories of some of the corruption I found here, have said that's how it is at home. That's no different. And so although their leadership, their countries are I agree, are worse, and that's why they left. So I'm going to say that when we behave in corrupt ways, that we are no different, we are no better. And what we hear about those countries and the oppression, the negative stories, those are true, and we need to heed those carefully. I don't think that should equate to otherism in our own country. If people have come here, they've come here because they want to be here, because they value the values that we espouse.
Yeah, well, I can see that. Jacoby, any thoughts around that?
No, I think Deb's spot on again. I mean, Debbie, you and I got to hang out more often.
I agree.
And I think a problem with the otherism, because, for example, having people never question if a Catholic has dual allegiance to Rome or Italy and America. No, but we only question that with Muslim individuals, which it should not be. They should be accepted for who they are, especially because we've got to judge them on what they are promoting and trying to push policy wise, and especially in government. Because if we're going to sit there and question who all has dual allegiance, are we going to look into the history of again with the example of Catholics, of Christians who may not were born here, but maybe were born in Greece or in France or in other countries, but because they're Christian, we don't question that. We move on past that. So the otherism is something that we have to stop doing because it demonizes people. And to bring into the immigration piece, which we do otherism all the time with, if you take a look at how Greg Abbott in Texas and that whole situation is playing out, where an actual officer had to call because they were treating the immigrants who were searching for asylum as animals by putting up razor wire and doing all these other things, pushing them back into the lakes and rivers and stuff. So when you otherize individuals, yes, you're creating a boogeyman. So you can be fearful of, but you never learn that person, which that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't ever treat somebody as an other. We should treat somebody as a person that I want to celebrate and learn more about.
So.
No doubt about that. Lee Newton Rhodes had actually brought up some interesting questions and everything, and I'll just throw them out. I know we've only got about 10 minutes or so, but I'll just throw those out. But he was asking to Nick's question, why is student debt more of an issue than credit card debt or home mortgages? Because those are issues that people are paying attention to as well. And he was also asking who were the ones censoring the last few years. And he asked the question whether it was the conservatives. And he was also asking the question about China manipulating the information and all in that space. But he also was saying that we did some of that during the pandemic. And I've heard that from some of the folks that have had different views about the way that the pandemic was handled and all in that space, whether you agree with the way or not. But that is something that has been brought up. And definitely the last thing that he said was that misinformation is today's truth. The earth is flat. And you do hear a lot of misinformation, even on the news media, and also some in the social news media as well, because a lot of the social media sites, whether that's Facebook, Clubhouse, Truth Social, or a number of others, have become their own versions of traditional media as well. So they are giving a lot of voice to people that didn't always have a voice, and sometimes it isn't always verified. So a lot of information is thrown out there that isn't necessarily verified by one way or the other, and all along those lines. And I was going to get to a sad piece of news that was from the musical lane, and I'm actually going to toss this to Sasha because I know that he is a musical lover as well. So just really quickly, I was going to mention the fact that the legendary Tony Bennett passed away, and he was like 97 or 96 or something like that, but he was definitely in his 90s, but had a illustrious career and definitely had a amazing career. And like I said, I know that Sasha is a music lover, both of classical but other music as well. So I didn't know if Sasha had any thoughts around Tony Bennett, and sounds like you might have some, Debbie, as well. But anybody that has any thoughts around the illustrious career, and the man did some great sounds of all kinds of various mediums, because I do think that the better musicians are hard to categorize because they do it in different lanes, whether it's jazz, classical, country, and he's definitely, even, I want to say Tony might have even done some stuff in the hip hop community with some of our hip hop artists, if you remember correctly.
Yeah. This is Steve, by the way. Sorry I'm late again, but
no problem.
Yeah, my memory of Tony Bennett is that it was, and I don't know the connection with Alzheimer's, but he was doing a 60-minute special with Lady Gaga, and it was so surreal because he was sitting with his wife, and I don't know whether it was Anderson Cooper that was doing the interview, but he didn't remember his wife's name. He didn't remember anything about his career. He could barely even remember his own name. But when they started playing the piano and he started singing with Lady Gaga, his memory came back completely. And so it was really strange how the music triggered his memory. But right after the music, it made me cry. He sang with Lady Gaga, and then right after the music, they went back into his living room. They waited about 5 minutes, and they were like, "Tony, where do you live?" And he says, "I don't remember." They go, "What's your wife's name?" He goes, "I don't remember." They go, "How long have you been a singer?" He goes, "I don't remember." So it was just so weird, but how the music triggered the memory, it's strange.
Yeah, Sasha,
He
any
could
thoughts
remember
about
every
Tony?
song, but he didn't even know where he lived.
Yeah. Sasha, any thoughts about Tony Bennett's music and career?
I met him briefly in Toronto in 1995. He had a performance there, and then I had a conversation with him. He's an extremely warm person. He executed a lot of, at that time, of course, a lot of confidence, a lot of appreciation of who he is and his place in music history. And overall, it was a very positive experience. One of the reasons that I wanted to meet him and talk to him was I wanted to arrange his performance at my daughter's wedding, which was coming a year later. And he was very open to the idea. His price was very reasonable, $10,000. I think well, not today, of course, but even a couple of years ago, it would have been probably 100 times more than that. However, things didn't click as a problem. My problem was that I didn't know exactly the date of the wedding, and he couldn't commit to it without knowing the date. So we just left it at that at the time, unfortunately. But his contribution to history of American music is absolutely incredible. He was singing on a very high level for about 8 decades, if I'm not mistaken. And you can imagine what's happened in 80 years of American music history. And of course, he was very versatile singer. He loved to perform. And it just showed, whether you watch him in interview on CNN with Anderson Cooper, or whether you watch him live. I saw him live probably well more than 10 times on different appearances in Toronto, in Las Vegas, and many other places. He was fantastic, and it's very sad day that, well, he was 96, obviously it was coming, but still, it is a very sad day.
Yeah, definitely. Any thoughts, Debbie? You've definitely been there in LA, and I don't know if you ever had the pleasure of seeing him perform either, but definitely any thoughts around his music and his life?
Just expressing the same thoughts and feelings. Very sad to see him go. He'll be missed.
Yeah, definitely. Jacoby, any thoughts as one of the younger bloods? I'm not exactly a spring chicken in that regard either, but in my 60s, but I think you're in the 40s or 50s age. But any thoughts about Tony Bennett's connection to music and even to some of the technology world?
I mean, the only thing I can express is everything that everybody has already expressed. Lady Gaga, I think, the thing, I think her feelings are the same feelings everybody else is feeling at this moment. I mean, that deep sadness, because he was a part of everybody's life. I mean, from performing with Elvis all the way up to with even Lady Gaga, just even recently, if I remember. So yeah, there's nothing different that I can say that hadn't already been said.
No doubt about that and everything. As I said, we're going to wind down. I know Steve usually has a closeout when he pops in and everything. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We've definitely got to some hard issues, and we'll get to some more on Monday. We've got some guests, and who knows, maybe Debbie will continue popping in. I'll keep sending her the links. I know she's a busy lady as well, so I don't know whether you'll be back with us on Monday or sometimes some of the days next week. But for the rest of the panel, I hope that you will, and I know that others that are even even Art on here now have said how much they have enjoyed your comments and everything, because Shaquille has definitely told me that, as has Kim and a number of others that aren't here in this particular moment. I hope you'll continue coming whenever you are available, Debbie, and we do have some other guests that'll be coming on. I know I've got one scheduled, I think, for the 25th and one for the 27th, but I'll have to look at my calendar and who I invited, including some folks in the science lane and in the political lane. So we'll have some interesting conversations next weekend going forward. But Steve, any things that you got in terms of your closeout as we get ready to wind down? And I know very shortly, will Ivan be joining you today, Sasha? Because I know he oftentimes gives us some great comments from
Sure.
that part of the world. So I'm hoping that he'll be joining us.
Yeah, that's John. That will be very important today, the program.
Nothing for closeout. I'll be back on Monday. We'll be talking about some changes in immigration reform with Canada, a little bit about WPTF 320. I'll be talking about Russia, Ukraine, the grain deal, the ports, and continue our conversation of immigration. And as we get through the summer, fall, where we're talking the presidential races, and 2024 will be here before we know it, and then it'll be the race for the White House. But anyway, thank you all for being with us. We'll be back next week for another edition of World Edition. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, a great visit and everything. Deb, that actually went faster than I thought it would from Steve and all along those lines. So do you have any last thoughts that you want to share? And will we expect to see you sometime next week or not and everything? Because definitely we still got about another 2 minutes to go. So any final thoughts that you want to share as our new regular panelist, but also one who's given us a West Coast perspective and all across those lines. And like I said, I do hope that you will return again on next week, either Monday or whenever you are able to make it. But any final thoughts that you want to share?
Oh, thank you, Mark. I don't have final thoughts. Oh, I did one. Well, yes. I wanted to mention that we did have an issue with Catholics. My parents told me that back in the early 60s, when JFK was running, that there were concerns that a Catholic was running for office and that the Catholic Church was too powerful. As far as coming back, I will be here, I believe, on Monday. On Tuesday, I have a show with another station. I can't remember where it is, but so it is definitely East Coast. So somebody else, I'm going to be talking with somebody else on the East Coast on Tuesday. So I don't think I'll make it Tuesday. I can't remember the timing there, but I will be back on Monday for sure.
Sounds good. We're definitely looking forward to seeing you on Monday and all in that space. And one of the things that I was getting ready to say that I read recently, which I did not know, and it's one of the guests that I have invited to talk about history because they are connected to 68, was apparently there was a deal with LBJ and the evangelist Billy Graham in order to keep LBJ in the race when he was running for president during that contentious presidential election. And I did not know that, but the gentleman that I have invited to be on the show hopefully will be coming on either next week or the week after. I can share some of that story, because sometimes the alliances that are formed, that strange bedfellow kind of story, is real, both in this time as well as back in the days of the 60s and the 50s and all in that kind of way. So it'll be interesting to learn what Billy Graham said in this secret deal with LBJ in order to keep him running, because they were definitely on different ends of the politics and everything. They had some commonality, but definitely they had some differences as well. So it'll be interesting to find out what the deal was in that place. But I'll be curious to find out when that person comes on. And like I said, I've sent them an invitation, so hopefully we'll be hearing from them very shortly and all along those lines. Jacoby, do you have any last words? I did not get to you, but I did.
I don't want us to end on a sad note because of discussing Tony Bennett, and now we know that Debbie's not going to be here one day next week, which is going to be a sad thing too. So we're going to go on a happy note.
Okay.
I got a book. Why was the Queen only 12 inches tall?
I don't know. Why was the Queen only what?
12 inches tall.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me guess,
because I'm thinking a ruler.
Oh.
What was it? Say that again.
Because she was a ruler.
Because she was a ruler.
Why should we have not let 2020 end?
Something to do with vision.
Or one.
Because that would be admitting that 2021.
Oh. Those are good ones. I like that. We'll get out of here on those notes. You know, with Nick and Sasha, I was actually, when you made the 12-inch joke, I was thinking of the queen and the chess piece, and I have not measured it, but that's where my mind was going just because of the chess game and all along those lines. So that's where my mind was going, because I know that some of the founders and some of the others with this network are strong chess advocates. So I was thinking it was a chess riddle, and also maybe there's an answer where it is a chess riddle, but that was where my mind was going, just knowing the history of some of our founders,
So you were-
some of the folks involved.
You were thinking that it was a riddle, some type of Queen's Gambit?
Either Queen's Gambit, exactly. Exactly. Good one. I like that. And on that note, we get on out of here with the usual going and comings that are seen when we are entering and leaving. But good one, and I love that kind of answer. So that was a good one. I appreciate it.